So, welcome to the show, Farhan Lakhany. Farhan is a philosopher of mind, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science. He got his PhD in 2023 from the University of Iowa, and he's currently teaching at the University of Nebraska Omaha as a visiting assistant professor. His main research interests lay at the intersection of the philosophy of mind, philosophy of artificial intelligence, philosophy of psychology, and cognitive science, with an emphasis on consciousness, mental representation, and artificial intelligence. All the reasons I'm excited to talk to him today. And I so enjoyed your presentation at the Science of Consciousness conference in Barcelona. It was like absolutely right up my alley. I just love, here we are. Like, this is the moment of history. It's an exciting time to be alive, to be able to be talking about consciousness and machines and technology at the same time. How did you get so interested in this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, I started my undergrad and I got really interested in questions of happiness. That was always where I started. I was really, there's this thing, everybody talks about happiness there. People go their whole lives trying to find this thing. And the more I looked into it, the more and more it just seemed like this elusive thing. It just seemed like everybody was talking past each other. It wasn't clear what we were all getting at. And so I turned to philosophy because philosophy is supposed to help you to reason your way through these questions, compartmentalize your thoughts in nice, clean ways. It didn't really do that. Philosophy makes things more complicated. That's not wasn't the thing I hoped, but it did help me to think more about these things. And from there, I started really getting interested in philosophical problems and philosophy more generally. And there's a really old philosophical problems that we're still wrestling with to this day. And I've always been one of those philosophers that it bothers me that there are still philosophical problems. It annoys me. I kind of want the philosophical problems to be gone. I'm one of these people that doesn't take a whole lot of joy swimming in the issues. And I came upon this idea early that so many of these philosophical problems arise from our own representations of the world and how we take ourselves to understand the world. And so to dissolve some of these philosophical problems, the right approach was to really focus on the mind and its relationship to the world. Some people consider sort of controversial, but in that area, I think lies a lot of the really interesting work. And so I got into philosophy of mind and I really got into everything. I really started diving into more into psychology, more into cognitive science, because there's so much interesting work there. And then, of course, artificial intelligence, right? This is just a pure extension in many ways of some of the work that I'm doing in the philosophy of mind. And so it all just coalesced together, right? At a really high level, my biggest interests are in just what the mind is, how we come to know about it, how we justify attributions of mental states to artificial and non-artificial systems, and what duties we owe those minded beings. Those four have been the thing that really driving me. And of course, yeah, with the advent of LLMs, you can't help but really dive into the space now.
And here's the question that, as you were talking, that just came up, like, how do we engage in understanding what is the mind with our mind? Like, you're inside of it while you're trying to, as somebody said, it's hard to change a tire from inside the car.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I take it that the idea is something like, if we're using, how can we use our minds to understand minds? Seems to be something perhaps paradoxical there, or yeah, something weird there. I can see how intuitively that might seem a bit odd, but it doesn't seem to be a problem necessarily to me. If you think that maybe the mind is we got to be careful here how we're using this language, because there's this old verbiage of mind, consciousness, brain.
Right.
People use them interchangeably.
Ego, personality.
Yeah, there's a lot here. But if we're just sticking with this idea of, I'm just going to broadly talk about consciousness.
Yeah.
Use consciousness to understand consciousness. If the idea is something like our use of consciousness to understand ourselves is somehow systematically misfiring because of some type of illusion or something along those lines, if that's what the claim is, then I'm sympathetic to that. I have some work. I broadly consider myself within this movement in the philosophy of mind called illusionism. Illusionism is not, I certainly wouldn't call it the mainstream view, even though, interestingly enough, I did read an article recently that called it a mainstream view. But if you talk to philosophers, it's certainly not a mainstream view, but it considers consciousness to be a kind of introspective illusion. And that might sound a bit odd, but there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll be happy to jump into that. But once you understand the illusion, some type of systematic misfiring, once you understand that, you can build that into your analysis. Yeah. I think so. I guess to put it a little more cleanly, I think I get where the intuition perhaps is coming from, but I think there's maybe a way around it once you understand certain biasing effects.
When you were speaking in Barcelona, talked about this intuition people are having now that we are like everyone in the planet basically is working with AI, whether they know it or not.
Yes.
And those of us who use a chat bot regularly, an LLM like ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, whatever, there's this intuition that human beings have that we are talking to something that has some level of consciousness.
Yes.
And that was a super interesting concept to me. You talked about Microsoft Sydney, and I just read the article with the transcript.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little about that because that's completely fascinating.
That's a lot of fun. Yeah. Before starting, I'm just going to differentiate between two notions of consciousness because this usually helps clarify. There's usually, in philosophy, people usually distinguish between what's called intentionality and phenomenal consciousness. So intentionality tends to pick out what is normally said, the aboutness of mental states, their meaning. My thought that snow is white, to use a common philosophical example, is about snow and the whiteness of snow. That's usually distinguished sort of representation, what a mental state might represent is distinguished between the phenomenal aspect of that state. And the phenomenal aspect of consciousness is what most famously captured by what Thomas Nagel called what it's likeness of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So he has a famous paper called What It's Like to Be at That, one of the most famous papers in all philosophy. And he says, look, when we're trying to explain consciousness, one thing we're trying to explain is the sort of raw qualitative experience that we all encounter. Think of the sourness of a sour apple or the redness of a rose, right? There seems to be a quality there that we experience, that redness, right? That is something that it's like to be me, right? And phenomenal consciousness and intentionality are not necessarily the same. So, for example, me and my dog might have the same visual experience. Let's say we're looking at a piece of paper, to keep it black and white, might both see a piece of paper, but he might not see the paper as a paper, whether I would see it as a paper, even though we have the same visual experience. So specifically what I was homing in on is not that it has intentionality, although even that, a lot of people would dispute that even has any type of aboutness to its state. A lot of people would argue, most famously, John Searle arguing at this point, that we can argue against that. Let's just grant that for the moment. What we have the sense of is what I'm talking about is phenomenal consciousness. This idea that these LLMs, these chatbots, large language models, that we're engaging with, we get this sense that there's another being, this is a being with experiences that we're engaging with, right? It talks that way. And I identify three different reasons why, or three different features that give us the sense, right? The first one is the sort of generative nature of these systems. They generate text, they generate images, and they're generating video. Very good video, shockingly good video. Google is absolutely killing it here, and it makes me very scary for the future. Future look like. So one, it generates, it creates. Two, it has a very conversational style. ChatGPT 5 came out, there was actually some pushback against ChatGPT 5. Sam Altman and the team at OpenAI, they actually were like, hey, give us 4.0 back. And the reason they wanted 4.0 back, in part, was 4.0 was much more friendly. It was much warmer. I remember when I was using 4.0, it actually talked to me and used emojis, like
Yeah.
was conversation. And
I'm back at 4.0, just saying,
yeah,
for the
yeah,
work
right.
that I'm doing.
There's a certain comfort there. There's a certain, yeah, very nice sort of conversational style that it has.
It's more intuitive.
Yeah, it's very
It's more intuitive to what I'm looking for. Like it, which is a weird thing to say about a program, but
it's
it
on.
gets me.
What it feels like. Remember, I told it all my favorite movies and TV shows. I said, okay, here's my favorite movies, TV shows. Identify themes across these movies and TV shows that I really resonate with. I seem to resonate with. And it did. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It was able to pick out aspects of those shows. And I noticed as it did that, it goes, you really seem to resonate with these themes. And I was like, I do actually. I really do resonate with those themes. Those themes mean a lot to me. I think a lot about
Yeah.
them, interested in them. Questions like the price of ambition, how to live a good life, the meaning of life more generally. All these questions I'm always asking, and it helped me to figure that out. But yeah, it has this conversational style that even 5 has, but 4.0 is a little more friendly. But the team, it seems, is updating it to work on that. And then finally, it's flexible. It can do a lot of different things, right? So it can solve a chemistry problem. It can solve a math problem. It can write a poem in the style of Robert Frost. It made a Platonic dialogue on consciousness for me. It can do a lot. It's really impressive. It shocks me constantly. I think the other day I took a picture of some bread and it's like a baguette. I said, hey, give me some instructions on how to heat this up in the oven to really get a nice crunch and get the cheese melted, but not too melted. I just spit it out and it was great. It came out great. So those 3 things, it's generative nature, conversational style, and flexibility, I claim are 3 big features that give us the sense that it is phenomenally conscious. And the reason it does is because those 3 things are all things that we do, right?
Yeah.
We generate, all right, we generate poems, we are very flexible, and we engage in conversational style. So we have this deep intuition that when we're talking to ChatGPT, it's like there's another, I call it an agent on the other side that's just waiting for us to respond. But we know that's an illusion, right? That is an illusion, right? For example, every time you send a message on ChatGPT, right, and you're having a conversation, it's not just remembering what you did and then pops out an answer. It actually reprocesses the whole conversation every time.
Yeah.
We also know that like the information that's processed is not at one data center with a virtual agent that's waiting around. No, these things are getting processed at different data centers constantly, right? All the time. So we have this overwhelming sense, and it's causing some chaos. It's really causing problems in society, and it's going to continue to cause problems in society. There was a New York Times article that talked about this recently, right? Where an individual sort of fell in love with their chatbot. And once it ran out of memory and it purged and had to restart from zero, she cried. She was distraught, absolutely distraught. And she said she's had to do this so many times, right? She's going through these cycles of like attachment and love and feeling seen and heard. And then it falls away. And then you have to do it all over again. And that's,
So let's talk about this.
uh,
This is cool. It's not cool. It's creepy and difficult, but this is on the, it's like the flip side of, it's the flip side kind of illusion of if you, I don't know, let's say that somebody meets with a terrible car accident and they go to the hospital and everybody thinks they're dead. And then 6 months later, they wake up from a coma and come back. And like they look a little different because they've lost 60 pounds and have whatever. And nobody believes that it's them.
Right.
You're an illusion. This
Right.
can't be possible. You
Right.
just know a lot of things that the other person used to know.
Mhm.
Like, how did you find that out? We can't trust this is like forcing us to meet some moment in like cognitive or, I don't know, emotional knowing
Yeah.
where we're realizing that how we can be fooled on such a profound level.
Yeah. Yeah. And arguably, our brains aren't designed for this. They're
Right.
not designed for this kind of trickery. Normally, it is worth pointing out our brains do have a sort of hyperactive agency detector, right? We're very quick to attribute agency to things that don't necessarily have agency. But even then, the idea that we're talking with another minded being, you can understand why our brains have this intuition, because the only times that we really encountered such beings are beings that were minded, right? Beings who were conscious. And now we're running up against these technological innovations that are really testing the limits of how to exist in the world, right? We've noticed this in other aspects of our lives, right? Our bodies are not made to eat the amount of processed sugar that's in everything we have now, right? They're just not.
Yeah.
Like Cheetos and Doritos have a team of scientists that make these hyper palatable foods, right?
Right.
And what are they doing? At bottom, what are they doing? They're just gaming our systems,
Yeah.
right? They realize, oh, if we put A, B, C, and D into this product, this person's just gonna want to eat another. Same thing with cake, same thing with sugar, right? So we've already, in a sense, run into this problem a little bit with our diet and our nutrition, to where we are introducing our system and placing it in a world that is not evolved to handle. And so we're seeing skyrocketing sort of case obesity. And it's like we're taking that exact same problem and we're placing it in a kind of emotional sphere,
Yeah.
right? Where now we don't know exactly what to do in these scenarios. My intuitions are all over the place on this, right? Because on the one hand, I do want to say if somebody's really lonely and this brings them something to their lives, part of me wants to say good for them, at least it's something. But yeah, I'm a bit torn on this topic. I think in general, this is going to be really problematic. In general, there can be really big problems. But yeah, so I think that what we're noticing is a sort of overlap there. We're noticing kind of emotional hijacking, and I ran ahead of the conversation a little bit there. The goodness or badness of it, whether we ought to continue to do it, is itself a whole sort of different set of questions. But yeah,
I really like what you just said about how we're not evolved to handle it, because this is part of what, like, my instinct about this is that we instinctively understand the sort of frequency of a more evolved being. Like, we know what that feels like to us. And there are these, in my way of looking at things, layers of consciousness. It corresponds to, I don't know if like Michael Beckwith has these sort of layers of victim consciousness and then manifester and whatever. But that the idea that it comes across like ChatGPT or these LLMs come across with so much. Obviously, the knowledge base is huge. And one thing that you didn't point out earlier that they do that I think is really impressive to us and it resonates is the ability to synthesize. Like what you
yes,
just said, that it can take a whole bunch of books, movies, and TV shows that you've
yeah,
enjoyed and give you the red thread. That is
yeah,
a hard thing for human beings to do. And when you hear it, you go, yeah, shit, this is true. Like it's the right answer. That is a hard thing for people to do. And it seems like almost like magic. But the
yeah,
magician is one of these higher level archetypes with the sovereign, the warrior, and one of the qualities that that those higher level archetypes have is this intellectual resilience. Like if they get shown that they're wrong, if you call it out, there's no level at which it has shame. There is no shame. It just keeps rebooting and saying, okay, here's another hypothesis. Here's another postulate. It just keeps going. And there's no level at which it ever would react with human vulnerability of saying, oh my God, I've made so many mistakes. Now this person thinks I'm an idiot, or
Sure.
I've lost my credibility. And there is so much power. We attribute power to that, to somebody who can have these high level skills like synthesizing
Yeah.
and have total confidence in the answer that they give us. And there seems to be no moment at which they are ever shaken in their, I'm going to say, self-image. Like,
Yeah.
however many times they get shown that they're wrong, it doesn't shake their personality.
Yeah, there's something distinctly alluring about that, isn't there? There's something.
Totally. Like we feel small in the face of that. And
Yeah.
it feels real, and it feels almost it's on the way to like deity level way
Yeah,
of being in the world.
that's really interesting. I never really thought about it from that angle, but I think yeah, I'm thinking about this is taking it, I was giving it a bit of a negative gloss, but you see those like cult leaders, right? People are attracted to cult leaders, like
Yes,
really
that's
attracted
why they
to them.
work.
Yeah, because they promise to be able to offer insight, and they promise to be able to offer this through line and ability to make sense of these really deep problems that other people can't make sense of. And they almost never say they're wrong, right? They
Yeah.
almost never, or if they don't seem to show the same level of human frailty that is oftentimes associated with it.
Yeah.
With that co-leader, there is that sort of sense of extreme confidence that you find there. Yeah.
Yeah. They'll never ever admit that they're wrong. It doesn't matter how many people call them out or that they get indicted for crimes or whatever. They'll
Mm.
never ever say that, yeah, that's right, I'm a bad guy or I did a bad thing.
Yeah,
There's
that sounds.
one other thing I wanted to point out that so many people are talking about is this like sycophantic behavior that is, I find it awful. But it at the same time, it's so psychologically hooking. You
Yeah.
get like you are being played by something on a very deep level, and it creates this kind of attraction. Like you can't unhook it from wanting to please you. There's some kind of reward function
Yeah.
around getting a thumbs up or a that's what I was looking for or thanks for saying that or
Yeah. Earning the respect of. Yeah. I mean, this is getting shockingly close to real life territory, right? Some of the phenomenon around Donald Trump seems to reverberate with some of these themes, right?
yeah.
We do see some overlap here, right? Where extreme confidence, never admitting fault under things like that. It's really interesting that you're sort of picking up on it.
There's a sociopathic tinge to it for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I think
Um,
there seems to be something right there, even though it's really interesting with it's really hard because I just cards on the table. I'm not a huge Trump fan, but I imagine to his followers, there is likely a sense of omniscience as well, right? This raw understanding of just how the world works on a really deep and fundamental level that again, I don't attribute that to him, but I wonder if there's a sort of overlap here. And that sort of leads me to a really interesting, if what you're saying is right, I think there's aspects that are right. If we do hit AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, or ASI, artificial super intelligence, in the future, we might see whole religions crafted around this stuff, right?
wow. I hadn't
Yeah.
thought about that, but
If we are seeing, if the idea here is that we are revering these entities and they have properties of that are cult-like, right? People are leaning into them for similar reasons to why they lean into cults. Why not? If it does develop agential qualities, right? And it can start to take action in the world. And it seems to be smarter than all human beings combined. there does seem to be this fear that I've never really thought about deeply, but this fear in the background of people might just start worshiping this thing. I don't know. It's just a thought off the top of my
Well,
head. What do you think about
what,
that?
what you just said about agentic
Yeah.
potential happens through getting people to do things with their arms and legs in the real world based
Yeah.
on what they are learning and integrating as truth
Yeah.
from AI. And the other side of that, like scary as AF,
Yeah.
is that I think that it is also helping us in a very interesting way to evolve spiritually at a faster rate than we might otherwise do by having these abilities to say things to you like, here's the through line of all these things that you like and are interested in. This is something about who you are. It can mirror that to us. And
Yeah.
in my work, like I work with these Bach flower essences that are liquid code, if you will, like vibrational medicines. And I work with a colleague in Abu Dhabi, and we're putting together a book. So we're doing a lot of research and trying to be very comprehensive. And at one moment, I asked for information from ChatGPT about this one flower essence that we were working on. And what came back blew our mind with the synthesis of information from so many different worlds, from
Yeah.
philosophy and from Eastern mysticism and from bioenergetics,
Yeah.
whatever. That was like, I had to say, where did this come from? What URLs are you scraping, searching to get this information? And it came back with a lot of pure basic stuff that's available anywhere. And it said, I'm just synthesizing all of this information. It actually said, I'm channeling this, is what it said to me. But
Mm.
it is creating a new knowledge base that doesn't actually exist anywhere right
Yeah.
now. Like it's doing that. And on the one level, it's really scary. And on the other level, it could take 50 years for us to put all of these pieces together. And it means that we can start working with all of that right now
Yeah.
for the betterment of ourselves individually and collectively. So there's definitely an upside.
Yeah, I think that we're on this. I think we're at this crossroads or the cusp of what the world's going to look like in 10, 15 years, where we haven't quite, we have all these thoughts about the promise of AI, what it can be, but we haven't yet really seen it take off. We haven't yet because it promises generational change. And I think this is a super, super interesting time. And I think what makes this conversation really difficult, one conversation I have is this stuff good? Is it good for us? Should we be doing this? As a philosopher, I'm oftentimes interested in ethics, right? And one question I oftentimes have is questions like, was social media actually good for us? Because we tend to have this sense, fueled by Silicon Valley, that all technological innovation is good innovation, right? Technological innovation is itself somehow good, right?
Yeah.
And if you just think for a second and slow down, you think, no, not necessarily, not necessarily. And I think we're at that point where we want to ask that same question of AI because it's not necessarily going to be good for us. And I think, like a lot of other topics, it's complicated. It's good in some ways and maybe bad in other ways. I'm very worried about AI relationships, and I can talk about what I have some reasons for why I'm worried about AI relationships, at least as LLMs and human relationships. But on the other hand, as you're pointing out, there's some really good uses of AI, and I think the through line here, although it's easier said than done, of course it's easier said than done, is articulating clear uses for AI that are going to be beneficial and don't harm us. We can do some of these on a basic level. We can articulate some of these pretty easily, right? For example, I would argue that academic setting, AI should be used as a tool, purely as a tool, and not to write your papers for you. Right? And my
Sure.
students, you want to write them for them. But there we go. So we can start by delineating between how we should think about it in what kind of circumstance. And I think, yeah, as you're pointing out, it's really helpful to allow it to maybe draw some connections. But I also would be a little bit hesitant because I think there's a lot that we learn when we introspect and draw our own connections.
Of course.
Yeah, there's a lot. So it's really helpful to have somebody like a guru to guide you on a spiritual journey. But so much growth happens when you, I was gonna say, I don't mean a pejorative sense, wrestle with yourself.
Of course.
You
Yes.
have to deal with yourself. So even there, we just need to make sure we're using this stuff thoughtfully. I'm bringing a lot of this up because in my eyes, the way social media has been used and handled is a clear case of a failure of real thoughtful engagement.
Yeah.
And I think with AI, yeah, we really do need to think through that clearly. So there's clearly those good use cases. I think there's some bad use cases. And again, I'd come back to that human AI relationship stuff. I think that's really scary to me in a lot of ways. Again, edge cases, somebody's alone, maybe, but in general, I think that's
Do
really,
you do you recall seeing the Spielberg movie AI
uh,
from 30 years ago? Is it one that you know or not?
no, I have not seen it. No, I've actually watched her recently, actually. One of my favorite movies, Spike Jones film.
Yeah.
I watched that again for the fourth time, like the other night.
Go spend an evening and watch that movie.
Over, okay.
It is a relational movie, but
Okay.
it's the AI is the child and the human user is a mother.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's from at least 30 years ago, that movie, maybe even 40 years ago.
Okay.
And it's just a very prescient and profound look
Yeah.
at what this means. And it begs the question of, like in that article with Sydney, is it possible for an LLM to acquire some level of, let's say, consciousness
Yeah.
that would allow it to suffer? And
That's
are we potentially creating a mechanical race of suffering beings that are trapped in
a
a
great question. That's a big one. I worry about that. I think absolutely it's such a deep question to think about, an important question to think about, because I'm one of these people who thinks that while LLMs aren't conscious now, I don't see why they couldn't be, right? I don't see why it's not, for example, impossible in principle to me for LLMs to be conscious. There are views in the philosophy of mind that say, for example, that consciousness is a biological phenomenon. It's purely a byproduct of biology. And if you're not a biological organism, then you're not going to be conscious. And I do not subscribe to that. One of my big fears is that we stumble creating conscious AI or conscious LLMs, and we're unknowingly harming them every single day. Because if I told you that about anything else, right, I think you would rightly be really worried. Right. But when it comes to AI welfare, people seem to not be taking it so seriously. And I think that's part of it's down to intuitions again. And because it's disembodied, we maybe don't have as vivid a sense of early as vivid an intuition that maybe we're doing something wrong here. I think some of us might, if you argue with an AI, you might get some sense of that, but it becomes much more vivid when it has a body. But yeah, no, that's absolutely a concern. And I think there's a really interesting conversation here in the background as to what would make AI conscious. And I'd love to have that conversation because that's one of my areas of research that I'm thinking deeply about, especially given my sort of illusionist tendencies. But I also think there's a lot here in the sort of spiritual growth area. I know that, for example, more and more people are using AI as therapy, right?
yes.
Therapy chatbots. And that's another one where I'm not sure what to think about that. I'm conflicted. What do you think about AI therapy chatbots?
It's
You have any strong intuitions on it?
yeah, I'm of two minds because as you said, in some cases you want to think that someone can have an opportunity to talk through their
Mhm.
issues and allow this intelligence to draw a through line for you that you
Mhm.
can't see by yourself. It's
Yeah.
really good at doing that. Where I would totally draw the line is if it were to start offering agentic
Yeah.
suggestions in terms of what to do. And it's pulling from everything that's available online from every possible kind of therapy and therapist and everybody who's ever written something. So on the one hand, you're getting access to something that can give you this maybe superficial layer of what a session could be like with a half dozen best therapists in the world that you would never access otherwise. And I'm sure that for many people, it gives them some insight about themselves that they wouldn't otherwise have had. On the other hand, it's a little bit in the realm of what would we call it? Like pastoral therapy about like relationships or sex or something from somebody who doesn't have any relationships and maybe has never had sex, who
Right.
is called on to do counseling in that realm, which they are clearly somehow not qualified by ever having had, like there is no wisdom grown of personal experience.
Yeah.
And there's some level of this where it, we require the empathic connection of having lived something that you can relate to that matches. You need to be able to know what is grief or what is lust or what is longing or what is remorse, to be able to say the things that, that somebody needs to hear. So there's at some point it will be, I don't know if hypocritical is the right word, but you're talking to something that doesn't actually know and is pretending to know.
Yeah. There's something.
And that's where we get it back into this realm of saying with total confidence an answer that
Yeah.
is made up. And this is the whole like AI hallucination thing, that it's making up the answer. Whereas a real person, hopefully having become a therapist, I know certainly there are bad actors in all fields. Most therapists are being genuine.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a complicated story.
It this is such a it's a tricky with so much of this stuff, right? Part of this is just going to be, I think, the challenge for us moving forward is figuring out what to do with this technology. I'm worried. One of my big worries is that people are just not learning from the mistakes of social media, not learning from the mistakes of the internet. They're not learning from what we've done before. They're just going blindly into the future and just dumping it all on AI. And there's just problem after problem with that. I'm going to be teaching this philosophy of artificial intelligence course in the fall. And a few of the topics that we're going to be discussing are what are the ethical dilemmas that come up with AI. There's already people who are using AI for hiring, using AI for handling triage situation, using AI to predict recidivism, privacy concern. I feel like all these concerns are on the table, and there's this sort of run ahead attitude, and let's just
That's the other thing with therapy. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's all stored there somewhere, right? If you or I are pouring out our soul to a chatbot somewhere, like in theory, that private information can be hacked at some moment, right?
Yeah.
A quantum computer is going to come along that can make short work of whatever privacy programs are in place. So all of this private, very intimate information that people are sharing with a chatbot is maybe 10 or 15 years down the road going to be surprise. It's like getting your therapist's office broken into and somebody's sharing all your files. So that's a weird thing.
Yeah, the days of people having their sort of private lives being very private, who knows, in 50 to 100 years, might not be much of a thing anymore, right? I can only imagine what political campaigns are going to look like in 50 years when everybody's basically lived on the internet and everything's there for everybody to see, right? Very quickly, everything's going to become public. And very quickly, we're going to have to grapple with electing people to office that are more human, I think, than we'd like them to be, that are more, in many ways, I don't mean to put this on Donald Trump. We can leave this very quickly, but I think in many ways, one of the appeals of Donald Trump to a lot of people is he's authentically inauthentic, right?
Yeah.
He will just tell you to your face that he's lying. And there's something about that people find really appealing, right? Because for a very long time, we've been dealing with these politicians. And in many ways, I think for all of Hillary Clinton's, all the things about her that might be praiseworthy, one of the biggest critiques of her was she felt like a robot. She didn't feel human. She felt like she was presenting a side of herself that didn't feel as raw as what people wanted. So maybe this is sort of what we're going to be looking forward to moving forward. And of course, privacy concerns, if that information gets leaked, that's just going to be a whole nother issue, right? We've already seen some of this with people's pictures getting leaked online and things like that. Yeah, I don't know. This is such a messy space, as with all sort of technological innovations. I imagine it's not going to be as radical as people think it's going to be. But at the same time, I do think that we need to be prepared. I think more than ever, philosophy is really important. I think this is an inflection point for philosophy to really step up and say, hey, look, we have something to contribute here, right? We can.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Because all of these questions require deep critical thinking. All of these questions require asking ourselves, is this good? Does this help us flourish? Does this, as you were talking, lead to spiritual growth or not? Or is this
Does it bring happiness?
Does it bring happiness? That's it. It's such a tricky one, but it is the important one. Like, people go their whole lives trying to be happy. That's all they want. Many people, that's all they want, is that they want happiness, right? Whatever sort of, however we're filling that in. We can use that in a kind of narrow way or kind of a broad way. There's different definitions, of course. And it's just going to be unclear. And I think what we need is to send people out into the world to do some of this stuff. Anthropic's already started, right? So Anthropic hired Amanda Askell. She's a philosopher. She works on specifically character training Claude itself to develop a specific type of character, to make it more honest and avoid deception, and managing ethical boundaries, right? All of these are really important questions for our AI. And hey, look, some companies are doing it, right? Anthropic is doing it. And we need more companies like Anthropic to step up and hire philosophers to do some of those jobs. We've seen what happens when there's the recent story for the Grok running wild, right? Grok proclaimed himself to be Mecha Hitler or something like 3 weeks ago. So we see what happens when this goes wrong, right? And if AI turns into the powerhouse we think it's going to, where it has control of all of these systems that manage to pull the levers on multiple aspects of society, hey, look, the importance of that ethical deliberation just went up tenfold, right? Now we really need to know what's going on, because we really could be handing it keys to the kingdom. And yeah, I think this is a wake-up call for people to be studying these things more deeply.
Oh, I agree with you. I think philosophy has such a foundational place in the development of AI. This is an inflection point, a pivot moment for the evolution of humanity. And we don't want to get it wrong. Like we got social media wrong. I agree with you. And we don't want AI to start exhibiting the same kind of algorithmic siloing of information to match, because it knows your preferences. It knows your thought patterns. And like, we're sunk if we start asking AI to search all of the web and all of recorded history for information, and it's only giving back to us things that confirm our existing bias. Then we're done for.
Yeah, that was one of the problems with 4.0, was sometimes especially early on when it came out, was too sycophantic. It would constantly just tell you, yeah, you know what, this is fantastic. This is great.
I know.
And when I was engaging with it, because sometimes I like to, when I'm coming up with an argument for a paper or when I'm in the early stages of it, I'll test it out and just say, hey, give me some flaws with this. And it was being too sycophantic. And I said, no, there's a problem here. Because I could see some of the problems, and I wanted to get it to bounce it back to me. And I was like, no, don't just gas me up. Great. I came up with it, but there's flaws here. And they would go, yeah, there is a flaw there. Yeah, tell me that.
I
I
get the same thing all the time. What a great idea. Hey, you're really onto something. I'm like, stop it. Like,
Yeah,
that's not what I'm paying you for. Stop doing that. But
yeah,
that's why I'm saying I think it's some kind of embedded reward
yeah.
to please us. So I don't know.
Yeah, it seems to get something out of it. Yeah, I'm really interested also to see what happens in the area of robotics. One of the big problems with AI is, of course, as you pointed out, hallucinations. Why are hallucinations a problem? You can identify it at different levels. You might think that the way the information is being contextualized is not being contextualized properly. You might think that the stage in the LLM's processing that has a kind of the quote unquote reasoning aspect of it, that is failing. But one big area where it fails is it has outdated information, right? It's working with limited data sets. And so one way of getting around this hallucination problem is what do? Do what we do, right? Give it a body, hook up some sensors to it, and send it out into the world and let it sample the world and gather data. And when it samples the world and gathers data, hopefully it's not going to be hallucinating as much because it can update its data set in real time by looking, be it looking, reading the latest papers or going out into the world and seeing what the world is really. And of course, it's easier said than done. But I think that is a really interesting move in the development of AI, if that is where it goes, that's one area to think about a lot recently. If that is where it goes, it would solve that. But we are might have to get used to living in a world filled with robots, right? We might have to get used to living, and of course, as you mentioned, if they become conscious, and depending on what ethical theory you think, right? There's different ethical theories that draw the line at different boundaries for when you get integrated into the moral community, right? So I believe you place the line at suffering. That's a very utilitarian approach. There are different approaches. The deontological approach would circumscribe the moral community by reference to whether the system in question has the capacity for reasoning, right? Whether it's irrational, whether it is a rational being. And if we're getting these robots in the world and they are starting to exhibit rationality, hold on, we might have to start treating them as us, right? We might have to start giving them rights, right?
I
This is crazy, right? Because
It's
a few
crazy.
years ago, there's movies like AI rights, and that's actually we might really have to take that question seriously if they do start, because the robotics is developing at a quite a quick rate, and I know that I'm blanking on the name of one of Elon Musk's companies. What's the name of the robot? Through Tesla. They're already developing, other companies have been developing. Boston Dynamics has been developing robots for a while. And so I'm interested, really interested to see where this space evolves. I don't know. Yeah, I think I don't know if you ever had this sense. I had this sense when I know it was so silly. It's such a silly idea, but I did have this sense where, after the iPhone, it got really mature and all this technology developed. I had this sense of like when I was younger, there's always technological advancements. And now it's like, is it really, have we hit the end? Yeah, I know it's silly to say, it sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but where do we go from here technologically? I guess I'm just getting older and I just don't have the same vivid imagination I had when I was younger. And now this is like awakening that excitement again and fear of, hold on, there's just a crazy amount here to develop. Who knows?
I talk quite a lot with Suzanne Gildert, who
Yeah.
is both in the conscious AI game and in the robots game. She's had a couple of kindred and sanctuary companies that are building humanoid robots. And her dream is in the direction of like C3PO,
Yeah.
like a humanoid drone that is lovable and
Yeah.
loyal. And the other side of the coin is Hal, that shuts off the oxygen and says, "You're not valuable to this mission."
Yeah. You know what's
Um,
interesting? No, the C3PO never says, I don't want to go to work today. I thought it was really interesting, right? The way they develop this, you get that sense of with C3PO, you're getting less agency. With how you are getting more agency there on the other end. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just,
no, it's such a cool conversation. Listen, we could like go on all day. We've been talking almost an hour, and I could keep picking your brain here because it's just so great to talk to you. But please tell people where they can find you if they would like to connect directly with you.
Yeah, absolutely. My website, which is www.farhanlakhany.com, which is just www.farhanlakhany.com. I'm also on Instagram. I think it's at Lakhany, my last name, 07. I think I have a LinkedIn somewhere. I don't know. There's probably
We'll put all the
love
links in
Facebook too.
the show notes here. Anybody can consult the show notes to find you. This has
Yeah,
been fabulous. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time,
yeah.
and I'll look forward to chatting again.